talking about being advanced, the world is generally more advanced. People are healthier, people are living longer lives. It doesn't seem that way when you look at the news and you see all the terrible things that are going on. But in fact, generally speaking, people are. They're living longer, healthier lives. Having said that, and I think if I do this,
then it clicks.
now, for the first time, I'm going to be quoting from the UNDP's Human Development Report, which is something they submit every year. It gives some good indicators as to the progress of the world that we live in. For the first time in 150 years, the combined output of the developing world's 3 leading economies, Brazil, China, and India, is about equal to the combined GDP of Canada, France, Germany, Italy, the UK, and the US. This is mind-blowing, I thought. And in general also, over the past decades, countries across the world have been converging towards high levels of human development. What do we mean by sustainable human development? Well, it means many different things to many different people, but I think what we've all kind of come to the conclusion, and I think this is important for you, is that no matter what the indicators say, there are certain things that you can't value: human happiness, human contentment, people's feelings of their own safety, of their own worth. These are things that are harder to evaluate, harder to measure, but are just as important, and probably very important if you're thinking about planning a city or planning a community. This brings to mind something that we are very involved in, and these are issues of equity and of participation. And people might have the best infrastructure in the world, they might have the most beautiful universities, but if they're not participating, if their voices aren't being heard, then no matter how much investment is being made into the infrastructure, chances are the progress will not be sustainable. And this is the situation we're in the world today. Great measures of success, but if people aren't feeling therefore participating and that they're enjoying their rights, these benefits are going to be short-lived somehow or another. When we talk about sustainable human development, this might be helpful to some of you. We define human development as expanding the choices of all people in society. It also means protection of the life opportunities for future generations. So it's not just about us, but it's about our children and their children and so on. And it's also about the environment. We have to care for the environment because obviously these resources are finite. They're going to run out if we don't use them properly and if we don't plan ahead. This makes the central purpose of development the creation of an enabling environment in which everyone enjoys long, healthy, and creative lives. Governance, and I'm not going to go into too much detail, but governance is the methodology. Governance is the way that we equitably share power, is the way that we can kind of all come together and have a certain degree of consensus about how it is that we live our lives. So it's not me dictating to you and it's not you dictating to me. Governance is the system that we should all aspire to in this world that we live in, or within our own societies, to make sure that everyone has a share and a say in how money is spent, how resources are utilized, and particularly, good governance ensures that political, social, and economic priorities are based on broad consensus in society, and that the voices of the poorest and the most vulnerable are heard in decision-making. And I would add to that the most marginalized in communities like mine, particularly women and young people. Civil society is an important part of this. Civil society actually includes institutions like yours. It includes NGOs and organizations like mine. We're not the state and we're not the market either. We're kind of in between, and we have a role to play. And I think we have a role to play in vibrant cities everywhere, not just in my part of the world, in organizations such as mine. I'll tell you one thing. The Arab Spring, which you've heard so much about, has failed in so many different ways. So many people had so many high aspirations. So many people thought that so much reform was going to happen because people were taking control. But I think the thing that people are now realizing is, in the countries that don't have an active civil society, people who are willing to work for organizations that are involved in human rights, that have institutions, that have strong NGOs, in those countries the Arab Spring doesn't really stand much of a chance. In the countries that civil society is more active, those are the countries where democratic transition actually does stand a chance. So I think it's something to also bear in mind, that space is needed for all kinds of institutions in all our societies. Dissatisfaction, again, going back to the Human Development Report, is on the rise in the North and the South. North and South meaning developed world, where you all come from, South, which includes the developing world where I come from. Dissatisfaction is on the rise as people call for more opportunity to voice their concerns and influence policy. And I think you see that everywhere, in riots, in people taking to the streets, and people generally being very fed up and pissed off by the systems they belong to. I'm going to skip this, and I'm going to go on to talk about some of my work. What we've noticed as an NGO working in communities, some of which are poor, is that even the most basic-looking programs, which might seem like a charitable program, which start off with maybe teaching or helping a woman produce, I don't know, sewing or anything like that, you can't really differentiate between a basic program and a political program. You have to remember that even the most basic programs have political dimensions. So when we were working with children, for example, we started looking at issues of children's rights. We started looking at issues of domestic violence, child protection. These are all issues of rights. It's not just about a kindergarten and a pretty kind of classroom. There are many more facets that need to be taken into consideration that have to do with people's participation, their entitlements and their rights, the legal framework around them, and all these kinds of things. What I'm trying to say is basically that there is no such thing as just basic services. People have to make sure that their rights, including health clinics, also have a rights dimension. This has to do with people's entitlements. When we work with communities where children's health is an issue, we also have to look at issues around the woman's domestic situation. Is she having access to services? Is she able to voice problems that she might have if, let's say, there is abuse in the home? All these kinds of things. So it's not just about the superficial kind of issues that you might think it is. Agriculture, we're looking at land rights, we're looking at issues around ownership, property laws. Do women have their rights when it comes to owning property, to selling property? It's not just about teaching people how to plant seeds, for example. Environment as well. There are political issues that surround all our projects that perhaps in the past we didn't really think about. We used to teach women how to read and write. We now know that literacy is not purely just about reading and writing. Language isn't neutral. Language, it depends what you're taught, but you're taught not only how to read and write, but you're taught to understand the rules that surround you, the rules that perhaps need to be changed. And we found that through this kind of work, women are taking steps forward. You know, we provide the space, but what they do with that space is kind of up to them. Young people as well, we've been working a lot with young people, trying to teach them about ICT, but it's gone to the next level. It's now about social media. It's about how they connect with other communities. We've actually got an interesting program where now young people in some communities which would never have dreamt of talking to Israelis through the internet are actually talking to Jewish kids in Israel, which for them would have been unheard of in the past. These are the kind of opportunities that are presenting themselves now. Even this kind of blend of kids wouldn't have happened. Usually girls and boys don't even mix in my part of the world, but all this change, all this is possible now in this new age that we live in. I think one of the most important things, though, is that community ownership of any kind of facility is essential. We have a network of 50 CDCs all over the country, community development centers. They're great, they're well equipped, but if the community doesn't feel that it has ownership, that it has access, that it can benefit, then it's just a pretty building that doesn't really serve much purpose. What's more important is what goes on in there and how much ownership people really feel for those kind of spaces. Stereotypes, I'm going to just say one thing. You saw the different kinds of people that we work in. Just because a woman covers her face, that doesn't mean that she's not vocal. Just because a person is in a wheelchair doesn't mean that they're not active. And this is something that we've learned very, very strong. It's a very strong lesson that I've personally learned from my work. The need for dialogue is huge, and I guess you're going to feel that way, especially now. None of our communities are homogeneous. We have different people from all over the place. We have minorities. Dialogue is essential. I'm going to quote someone called Paulo Freire, who's I don't know if you know, a Brazilian educator and thinker. And he said, if the structure does not permit dialogue, the structure must be changed. And that is not just physical structures, although I think physical structures kind of need to reflect that as well, that openness to allowing dialogue, to allowing exchange. Lessons need to be learned from everywhere. I was very interested in preparing for this. I read something that Mayor Bloomberg of New York City said when he established the Center for Economic Opportunity in New York City. They actually took a lot of lessons from the South. They learned from countries like Brazil, even some African countries, in setting up their family rewards program. He said no one has a monopoly on good ideas, which is why New York City will continue to learn from the best practice of other cities. And I think that's something to bear in mind, because none of us live in closed communities. We can all share, we can all exchange, we can all learn from each other. And finally, I want to end on a note about transformation, because I think essentially vision is all about transformation. It's about taking elements that we like and maybe shaping and molding a new reality, which we like even better, and we keep our focus on that. And that's, in a sense, it requires governments, it requires communities, it requires institutions, but at heart, it's a very personal thing, and I think all of you, in order to have a vision, have to be very personally engaged and very personally motivated. And again, I'm going to quote Paulo Freire here, because I think he says it really, really well. He says, the more radical the person is, the more fully he or she, actually I'm going to read another version, which I like better. The radical, committed to human liberation, does not become the prisoner of a circle of certainty, within which reality is also imprisoned. On the contrary, the more radical the person is, the more fully he or she enters into reality, so that knowing it better, he or she can transform it. The individual is not afraid to confront, to listen, to see the world unveiled. This person is not afraid to meet people or to enter into dialogue with them. This person does not consider himself or herself the proprietor of history, of all people, or the liberator of the oppressed. We're not heroes, pretty much like was said in the previous presentations. We don't have to feel that it is our responsibility to free all people. But he or she does commit himself or herself within history to fight at their side. And I think this is what we all are. We're all co-partners in that kind of new reality. And I thank you very much for your time.